The phone call came on a Tuesday, a day of muted gray light and the smell of rain on hot asphalt. Liam Sterling was in his office, a small, tidy space that his wife Clara called his hobby room. He was sketching on a drafting table, the graphite whispering across the textured paper when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Sarah, his cousin. A knot of apprehension tightened in his stomach. Sarah never called during work hours. "Sarah, is everything okay?" he asked, his voice calm, betraying none of the sudden unease. There was a pause, filled with a sound like a shuddering breath. "Liam, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't be doing this. It's a complete breach of professional ethics, but your family, I can't not tell you." Liam's hands stilled over the drawing of a soaring glass facade. He stood up straighter, the quiet world of his office suddenly feeling fragile, as if it could shatter with her next words. "Tell me what, Sarah?" "Clara was here today," she said, her voice strained, professional composure shredded by personal horror. "For her session, we were talking about your marriage, about the future." Another hesitation. Liam could picture her, his kind, earnest cousin, wrestling with her conscience. "Liam," she said she feels nothing for you. Her exact words were, "It's like living with a piece of useful furniture. He's stable, he's there, but I feel nothing for him." She said she's staying until her father's big project is secured, and then she's planning to leave. The words landed not like a blow, but like a quiet, cold poison seeping into his veins. A piece of useful furniture. The phrase was so perfectly, cruelly dismissive. It wasn't born of anger or hatred, but of a profound and chilling indifference. He looked around his office, at the neat stacks of books on structural engineering, the framed photos of architectural marvels, the meticulously organized blueprints. This was his world, the one he had built, the one she had always disdained with a faint, patronizing smile. "Liam, are you there?" Sarah's voice was laced with panic. "I'm here," he said, and was surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. The initial shock was already crystallizing into something else, something hard and clear. It was not anger, not yet. It was a profound, aching clarity. He had known, of course. He had felt the growing distance, the polite contempt, the way she looked through him at family gatherings. But hearing it articulated so clinically, so brutally, was different. It was a final, undeniable truth. "Thank you for telling me, Sarah," he said. "You did the right thing." The way she said it, so cold, while talking about the Preston Tower, about how it will cement their family's legacy. It was all about status, Liam. All of it. "I know," he said softly. "I've always known." After he hung up, Liam didn't move for a long time. He stood before his drafting table, his gaze fixed on the drawing. It was a detail of the pinnacle of the Preston Tower, the very project Sarah had mentioned, the one that was supposed to be the crowning achievement of his father-in-law, Richard Preston, the one whose brilliant, reclusive architect, known only by the pseudonym Ethelred, the entire Preston family lauded as a genius, a visionary, a man of true substance. Liam picked up his pencil. His hand did not shake. With a few precise, elegant strokes, he made a subtle but significant alteration to the design of the spire, a change that would improve its aerodynamic profile and the way it caught the morning light. A change only the true architect could make. He was, after all, Ethelred. He was the ghost they praised, the genius they revered, while the man of flesh and blood they saw every day was just furniture. They thought he was a small-time architect who designed sunrooms and renovated kitchens. They thought his modest income and quiet demeanor were signs of a lack of ambition, a failure to measure up to the dynastic wealth of the Preston family. They had no idea that his small firm was a deliberate front, a shield for the real work. They didn't know that over the past decade, through shrewd investments in two wildly successful, anonymous software ventures, he had amassed a fortune that quietly dwarfed their own. They didn't know that he was the sole creative and financial power behind the very project they believed would be their salvation. They didn't know that their legacy was, and always had been, resting entirely in the hands of the man his wife felt nothing for. The man who, until this moment, had felt everything for her. This wasn't just about a broken heart. It was about a decade of quiet humiliations, of being patted on the head and dismissed, of being tolerated as Clara's strange, unambitious husband. The phone call was not an ending. It was a beginning. The quiet, methodical architect was about to design his final project, a structure of truth, built on a foundation of their own arrogance, so perfectly constructed that when they finally saw it, they would have no choice but to stand in awe of their own ruin. If you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever been judged by your appearance rather than your substance, then you know the quiet fire that builds inside. You know the patience it takes to wait for the right moment. For Liam, that moment had just arrived. Stick with us and tell us where you're watching from as we watch a man who was seen as a piece of furniture become the architect of a reckoning that no one saw coming. The first test of his new resolve came less than a week later. It was the Prestons' monthly family dinner, an ordeal Liam had always endured with a kind of stoic resignation. The events were always held at the Preston family estate, a sprawling, ostentatious mansion that Eleanor, his mother-in-law, referred to as the main house, as if their own comfortable home were merely a temporary lodging. Liam drove them in Clara's car, a sleek German sedan he'd bought for her birthday 2 years ago. She'd thanked him with a kiss that felt more like a press of cool wax to his cheek. Tonight she was particularly radiant, dressed in a sapphire blue dress that matched her eyes. She hadn't mentioned her therapy session, and Liam had not given any indication that he knew. He was playing his part, the stable, reliable, invisible husband. "Do try to engage tonight, darling," she said as they pulled up the long gravel driveway. She didn't look at him, her attention fixed on the grand, columned entrance of the house. "Daddy is going to be talking about the tower. It would be nice if you could show some interest. It's the most important thing happening in our lives right now." "Our lives," she'd said. The word was a casual lie, a slip of social convenience. Her life was the tower, the parties, the status. His life was, well, he was furniture. Furniture didn't have a life. "I'm always interested in your father's projects," Liam replied, his voice even and mild. The dramatic irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. Inside, the house hummed with the Prestons' particular brand of loud confidence. Richard Preston, a man whose physical stature seemed to swell in direct proportion to his net worth, was holding court in the drawing room, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. His wife, Eleanor, a woman who looked as if she were sculpted from porcelain and disapproval, stood beside him, her smile as fixed and brittle as her lacquered hair. "Liam, there you are," Richard boomed, his eyes flicking over Liam's simple but well-tailored suit with faint disdain. "Clara, darling, you look like $1 billion. Come, come. We were just discussing the final schematics from Ethelred. The man's a poet in steel and glass." Liam took a glass of water from a passing waiter and found a quiet corner, observing. The room was filled with the Prestons' inner circle, sycophantic business partners and old money friends who all shared the same air of unshakable entitlement. They spoke of Ethelred in hushed, reverent tones. "He's insisted on complete anonymity," one of the partners, a man named Henderson, was saying. "Doesn't want his name public until the ribbon cutting. A true artist, cares only for the work." "Unlike the hacks who build extensions for a living," Richard added with a loud laugh, clapping Liam on the shoulder with just enough force to be demeaning. "No offense, son. Someone's got to design the garden sheds of the world, eh?" The group chuckled. Liam met Richard's gaze and gave a small, polite smile. "None taken, Richard. Every structure has its purpose." Clara, who was standing beside her father, winced almost imperceptibly. It wasn't a wince of defensiveness for her husband, but of embarrassment. She wished he would disappear. Liam saw it clearly. The way her fingers tightened on her wineglass, the slight flush on her cheeks. He was a blemish on her perfect evening. Later at the dinner table, Richard unrolled a copy of the tower's floor plans across the mahogany surface, nearly knocking over a vase of lilies. "Look at this," he said, his finger tracing the lines with a proprietary air. "The way he's integrated the public atrium with the private offices. Sheer genius. There's one little thing I'm not sure about, though. This support column here," he pointed, "seems intrusive." He looked up, a glint of mischief in his eye. "Liam, you're an architect, of a sort. What's your take? From your vast experience with patios and garages, what would you do with this support column in a 90-story skyscraper?" The table fell silent. Everyone looked at Liam. It was a test, a public humiliation disguised as a question. He was being asked to perform his inadequacy for their amusement. For a fleeting second, the old Liam, the man who endured, wanted to shrink. But then he remembered Sarah's voice. A piece of furniture. He leaned forward, looking at the plans. His plans. "The column is non-negotiable," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's not just a support. It's the primary housing for the building's entire fiber optic network and part of the counter-seismic dampening system. Moving it would require a complete redesign of the core infrastructure and would compromise the building's integrity during a lateral wind or seismic event. It's the single most important pillar in the building." He leaned back, took a sip of water, and added, "But I'm sure Aethelred considered that." The silence that followed was different. It was heavy, uncomfortable. Richard stared at him, his mouth slightly agape. Liam's explanation had been too detailed, too confident. It wasn't the fumbling guess of an amateur. It was the swift, precise answer of an expert. Clara stared at him, a strange, unreadable expression on her face. It was a flicker of surprise, quickly masked by annoyance. He had broken the script. He was supposed to mumble something vague and look foolish. Richard recovered first, clearing his throat. "Well, quite the technical answer. Obviously, the man has his reasons. Just an aesthetic observation." He quickly rolled up the plans, his enthusiasm for the game suddenly gone. The conversation moved on, but the mood had shifted. Liam had, for a brief moment, refused to be the man they thought he was. He had shown them a glimpse of something else, but their arrogance was a shield. They couldn't, or wouldn't, see it. They would rationalize it as a lucky guess, a bit of trivia he'd picked up in a textbook. For the rest of the evening, they mostly ignored him, which was its own kind of punishment. He sat through the dessert course, the clinking of spoons against porcelain sounding unnaturally loud in his ears. He was an alien at this table, a man out of place. But for the first time, he didn't feel small. He felt like a cartographer, silently mapping the terrain of his own liberation. Each condescending glance, each dismissive word, was another landmark on his journey out. And as he watched them, so confident in their world, so blind to the truth sitting right there at their table, he felt a new emotion begin to stir beneath the cold clarity. A quiet, thrilling sense of power. The drive home was thick with a silence that felt heavier than the one on the way there. Clara stared out her window, the city lights flashing across her face, illuminating the hard set of her jaw. Liam knew she was angry, but he also knew she wouldn't say why, not directly. The Prestons never confronted things head-on. They used implication and atmosphere as their weapons. Finally, as they were pulling into their garage, she spoke. "You embarrassed my father tonight." Liam turned off the engine, plunging them into near darkness, the only light coming from the cold, white glow of the garage sensor. "I answered a question he asked me," he replied, his voice neutral. "You know what I mean, Liam," she snapped, turning to him. He was joking. It was light-hearted. "You had to come back with that textbook lecture. You made everyone uncomfortable. You made me uncomfortable." "Because I didn't play the fool he wanted me to be?" Liam asked, and for the first time, A sliver of the coldness he felt inside entered his tone. Clara flinched. Because you don't know your place. It was a social dinner, not a symposium on structural engineering. You were supposed to be charming. You were supposed to fit in. Fit in. It was always about fitting in. Fitting into their world, their expectations, their hierarchy. He was the square peg they had been trying to hammer into a round hole for a decade. My place, he repeated softly. And what place is that, Clara? Oh, don't be dramatic, she said, her voice dripping with exasperation as she unbuckled her seatbelt. You know exactly what I mean. She got out of the car and slammed the door, the sound echoing in the concrete space. Liam sat in the darkness for a moment longer. My place. His place was to be invisible. His place was to be a quiet, stable presence that made her look good. A man whose own life was small enough that it would never cast a shadow on the brilliance of her family. His place was to be furniture. He went not to their shared bedroom, but to his office. He closed the door, the click of the latch a small, satisfying sound of separation. The room with its clean lines and organized chaos felt like a sanctuary. This was his place. He turned on his desk lamp, illuminating the large, detailed blueprints of the Preston Tower. He ran his hand over the paper, the texture familiar and comforting. He spent the next several hours working. He wasn't just tweaking the design, he was orchestrating a symphony of logistics. He pulled up a series of encrypted files on his computer. They contained geological surveys, supply chain contracts, and labor agreements. But they also contained something else. A complex web of shell corporations and holding companies. For the past 2 years, using his own capital, Liam had been systematically buying the properties surrounding the proposed tower site. Not just adjacent lots, but key buildings on the block, including one that housed the primary electrical substation for that entire quadrant of the city. The Prestons believed they had secured the land. What they had secured was the central plot. They were building an island, surrounded by a sea that Liam controlled completely. Their access for construction equipment, their utility hookups, their very ability to break ground, it was all contingent on agreements with entities they believed were disconnected local landowners. They had no idea they were all owned by a single, silent entity. A.L. Sterling Holdings. Ethelred Liam Sterling. He dialed a secure number. His business partner and the public face of his larger ventures, a shrewd, loyal man named David Chen, picked up on the first ring. How was the lion's den? David asked, his voice sharp and alert. They're sharpening their claws, Liam said, leaning back in his chair and staring at the ceiling. Richard tried to humiliate me by asking for my opinion on the tower's design. David chuckled. I'd pay to see his face. What did you say? The truth, Liam said. It confused them. Confusion is a good first step, David said. Are we sure about this, Liam? The final phase, it's a hell of a move. You could just walk away, take your money, and build your own city somewhere else. It's not about the money, David. You know that, Liam said, his voice quiet. He thought of Clara's dismissal, Richard's condescending laugh, Eleanor's look of pity. For 10 years, they've treated me as less, not as a person, but as an accessory they were embarrassed by. They value status, power, and legacy above all else. So I will speak to them in the only language they understand. I'm not just walking away, I'm repossessing my own narrative. And Clara? David's voice softened. It was the one variable he had always worried about. Liam's gaze fell on a small, silver-framed photo on his desk. It was from their wedding day. They both looked so young, so full of a hope that now seemed impossibly naive. He felt a pang, not of love, but of mourning for the man who had believed that love could conquer contempt. Clara made her choice long ago, Liam said, his voice hardening. She just hasn't been forced to live with it yet. I'm about to give her that opportunity. He ended the call and turned back to his screen. He brought up a new file, a master contract. It was the primary development agreement for the entire district, not just the tower. It outlined the phased construction, the public-private partnerships, the zoning variances. It was the master key to the entire kingdom. He spent another hour reviewing every clause, every subsection, ensuring it was an ironclad fortress of legal text. When he was finished, the first hints of dawn were breaking, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and soft gray. He felt no fatigue. He felt a calm, cold sense of purpose. He was no longer just the architect of a building. He was the architect of what was to come. The Prestons were so focused on the monument they were building to themselves that they had never bothered to check the foundations. And Liam had just confirmed, the ground beneath their feet was about to give way. The humiliation he had felt at dinner was the last he would ever endure from them. From now on, he wasn't the guest in their house. They were about to become visitors in his world. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in duality. To his wife and her family, Liam remained the quiet, slightly awkward man he had always been. He attended the requisite social functions, smiled politely at their self-congratulatory chatter, and retreated into the background, the perfect embodiment of unassuming furniture. Clara seemed to have forgotten the tension of that one dinner. Her husband had returned to his place, and the universe, as she understood it, was back in order. Her days were a whirlwind of planning for the upcoming Preston Tower Foundation Gala, a lavish event designed to announce the final approval of the designs and begin the major fundraising push. "You have to come, of course," she told him one evening, scrolling through a list of caterers on her tablet. "It's black tie. Please don't wear that old tuxedo, Liam. Go and get a new one, something modern." The implication was clear. "Try not to embarrass me." "Of course," he said, looking up from his book. "I wouldn't miss it." Meanwhile, in his other life, Liam was a whirlwind of decisive action. As Ethelred, he delivered the final, breathtakingly detailed architectural plans to the Preston Court Board, earning him another round of effusive, anonymous praise. As A.L. Sterling, he finalized the acquisition of the last crucial property on the block, a small, rundown parking garage that happened to sit directly on top of the main water and sewage lines for the area. The Preston's engineers had simply assumed they would get the easement. They had not yet realized they would have to negotiate with a man who held all the cards. Liam, the hobby architect, did as he was told. He went to a high-end tailor and was fitted for a new tuxedo. It was a beautiful piece of clothing, exquisitely cut from dark charcoal wool. As he stood before the mirror, the tailor making small chalk marks on the sleeves, he saw not himself but the character he was playing, the compliant husband, polished and presented for his wife's approval. He felt a strange detachment, as if watching a scene from a play. The night of the gala was the pinnacle of the Preston's hubris. It was held in the grand ballroom of the city's most expensive hotel. Crystal chandeliers glittered, champagne flowed, and the air was thick with perfume and self-satisfaction. Richard and Eleanor stood at the entrance, greeting governors and banking tycoons, their faces flushed with triumph. Liam arrived with Clara, who looked stunning in a silver gown. She immediately abandoned him, swept into a vortex of air kisses and society chatter. Liam was left to drift on the edges of the crowd. It was here, in this sea of wealth and power, that his apparent insignificance was most pronounced. He was a ghost at the feast. A portly man Liam recognized as one of Richard's chief business rivals, Marcus Thorne, cornered him by the bar. "Sterling, isn't it?" Thorne said, his tone oily with false sympathy. "Clara's husband. She's a remarkable woman. Always thought she would marry into one of the big families. Still, I suppose she chose comfort." He gave Liam a pitying look, as if appraising a stray dog. Liam simply nodded, a serene smile on his face. "She certainly did." The true humiliation, however, came from Eleanor. She swept past him, a frantic look on her face, and thrust an empty glass into his hand without even looking at him. "Be a dear and get me a gin and tonic, would you?" The waiters are simply swamped. She was already turning away before he could respond, having mistaken him for a member of the catering staff. He stood there for a moment, the empty glass in his hand. He looked at her retreating back, then at the bustling crowd. He saw Clara across the room, laughing with a senator. She caught his eye for a brief second. She saw the glass in his hand, saw her mother walking away. A flicker of panic crossed her face, followed by a quick, dismissive shake of her head, as if to say, "Just do it. Don't make a scene." She turned back to the senator, her smile brighter than before. That was it, the silent enabler. The moment she chose her mother's convenience and the avoidance of a scene over her husband's dignity. It was a small thing, a tiny betrayal in a room full of grand gestures, but it was the most profound cut of all. It severed the last fraying thread of affection he might have held for the woman he had married. He didn't get the drink. He placed the empty glass on the tray of a passing waiter and walked out of the ballroom onto a secluded balcony. The cool night air was a relief. The city sprawled before him, a glittering tapestry of lights. In the distance, he could see the dark, empty space where the Sterling Tower would soon rise. His tower. He reached into his pocket and his fingers closed around a small, cool object. It was a custom-made USB drive, shaped like a miniature steel girder. It contained every contract, every deed, every email, every piece of the intricate web he had woven around the Preston family. It was the complete architectural plan of their downfall. He had brought it with him tonight, a secret talisman of the power they couldn't see. He stayed on that balcony for a long time, the sounds of the party a distant murmur. This was the quiet before the storm. He was giving them this night. He was letting them have their moment of supreme, unadulterated arrogance. It was important that they reach the absolute peak before the fall. It would make the lesson clearer. When he returned to the ballroom, Richard was on stage, his face beaming under the spotlights. And so, with the genius of Aethelred and the strength of the Preston name, we are not just building a tower, he grandly declared. We are building the future of this city, a legacy for generations to come. The crowd erupted in applause. Liam stood at the back, his hands in his pockets, and watched. He looked at Clara, her face upturned towards her father, her eyes shining with adoration and pride. She looked beautiful, and he felt for the first time absolutely nothing. The furniture had finally become cold stone. The reckoning was no longer a plan. It was an inevitability, waiting only for his command. And he had decided, tonight, when that command would be given. It would not be in a boardroom or a courtroom. It would be in his own home. 2 days after the gala, Liam sent a simple, formal email to Richard, Eleanor, and Clara. Subject: Family Matter. Dear Richard, Eleanor, and Clara, I would like to host a dinner at our home this Friday evening at 7 p.m. There are some important matters regarding our collective future that I wish to discuss with you all in private. Please make every effort to be there. Sincerely, Liam. The email was intentionally vague, calibrated to pique their curiosity and, more importantly, their arrogance. He knew how they would interpret it. Our collective future. They would assume he was either buckling under the pressure or preparing to announce his departure. Clara called him almost immediately. A dinner, Liam? What is this about? Her tone was suspicious, weary. If this is about the other night at the gala, I really don't think... It's not about the gala, he said calmly. It's about what comes next. For all of us. It's important that we're all together. Please, just be there, Clara. His unusual firmness seemed to intrigue her. Fine, she said. I'll make sure they come. But Liam, if this is some kind of dramatic gesture, the only gestures will be honest ones, he promised. He spent the next 2 days preparing. He didn't hire caterers. He cooked the meal himself, a simple, elegant menu of dishes he knew they enjoyed, a final, ironic act of service. He set the dining table with their best china, the wedding gift from his own parents, which the Prestons had once subtly mocked as charming but plain. The house was immaculate, filled with the scent of roasted rosemary and something else, the clean, sharp smell of impending truth. Friday arrived. Clara was tense, watching him with narrowed eyes as he moved around the kitchen. "You're being very strange, Liam. All this cooking, it's not like you." "I want tonight to be memorable," he said, placing a bottle of wine, a vintage he knew Richard coveted, on the sideboard. The Prestons arrived at precisely 7, carrying their entitlement like an invisible cloak. Richard strode in, giving the room a cursory glance. "All right, Liam, we're here. Clara said you had something important to say. Let's hope it doesn't take all night. I have an early tea time tomorrow." Eleanor glided in behind him, her nose wrinkled slightly. "It's very domestic, isn't it?" she murmured, eyeing the home-cooked meal. They sat at the table, a tribunal ready to pass judgment. Liam sat at the head, the place Richard usually occupied by sheer force of personality. Tonight, Liam did not cede it. He poured the wine, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice echoing slightly in the tense silence. "I know you're busy. I asked you here because we've been a family for 10 years, and it's time we had a conversation based entirely on facts, not assumptions." Richard snorted. "Facts? What facts are those, son? That the market is up? That my tower is about to break ground?" "Those are some of them," Liam agreed, "but I'd like to start with more personal ones." He looked at each of them in turn, his gaze steady and unwavering. "Richard, you've built an empire on the idea of value. You assess everything and everyone for their worth. So let me ask you, after 10 years, what is my worth in your eyes?" Richard was taken aback by the directness. "What kind of a question is that? You're my daughter's husband. You're—" "Fine. Am I?" Liam pressed gently. "Or am I the hack who builds garden sheds? The man whose opinion is only requested as a punchline at a dinner party?" Eleanor stiffened. "There's no need to be so sensitive, Liam. Richard has a certain sense of humor." "I'm not being sensitive, Eleanor. I'm stating a fact," Liam said, his voice still quiet. He turned to her. "You value appearances more than anyone I know. The right clothes, the right friends, the right image. 2 nights ago at a gala celebrating your family's greatest achievement, you handed me your empty glass because you mistook me for a waiter. Is that the image you have of me? Someone who is there to serve you?" Eleanor's face flushed a blotchy red. "I was flustered. It was a mistake." "It was a moment of honesty," Liam corrected. He then turned his eyes to his wife. Clara was staring at her plate, her knuckles white where she gripped her fork. "And you, Clara, you stood 10 feet away and watched it happen. You said nothing. You did nothing. You chose to avoid a moment of awkwardness over defending my dignity. A fact." He let the word hang in the air. "And the most important fact of all," he continued, his voice dropping slightly, "is the one you shared with your therapist, who is also my cousin. The fact that you feel nothing for me, that I am a piece of useful furniture you plan to discard once your father's legacy is secure." The silence that followed was absolute, profound, and terrifying. Clara's head snapped up, her face a mask of pure horror and disbelief. Richard and Eleanor stared, first at Clara, then at Liam, their minds scrambling to process the accusation. You spoke to my therapist?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling with outrage and fear. "She spoke to me," Liam corrected gently. "Her conscience outweighed her professional code. A choice she made because she saw a profound cruelty and felt it had to be answered." Richard found his voice first. It was a low growl. "You're lying. Clara would never say that. And this is a disgusting, pathetic attempt to lash out because you know you'll never measure up." Liam didn't flinch. He simply held his ground, his calmness a stark contrast to their rising panic. The trap was set. They were all in the room, the doors were closed, and he had just lit the fuse. He let them sit with the wreckage of their own words, the ugly truths he had simply gathered and held up to the light. The meal sat untouched on their plates. The aroma of rosemary now seemed funereal. The dinner party he'd orchestrated was over. The trial was about to begin. The explosion came from Richard. He slammed his fist on the table, making the fine china jump. "How dare you? You come into my family, you live off my daughter's good graces, and you have the audacity to make these insane accusations. You're a pathetic little man, and this is a pathetic little tantrum." Liam remained perfectly still, his hands resting on the table. "Every word I just said was true. Look at your daughter, Richard. She's not denying it." All eyes turned to Clara. She was pale, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She looked cornered, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. "He's twisting my words," she finally managed, but her voice lacked conviction. It was the weak protest of the guilty. "Am I?" Liam's voice was soft, almost surgical. "Let's talk about another project then, the Preston Tower." The change of subject was so abrupt it wrong-footed them. Richard seized on it, seeing a return to his territory, his power. "Yes, let's talk about a real achievement, something built by men of vision, not by resentful boys playing games." "I agree," Liam said. "It's a magnificent design. I've spent a great deal of time on it." He paused, letting the ambiguity of his words settle. "You all praise its architect, Aethelred. You call him a genius, a poet in steel and glass. You admire his desire for anonymity, his focus on the work above all else. You see him as the epitome of everything you value." He looked from Richard's smug face to Eleanor's proud one. "You've built your entire future legacy on the work of this one man." "Damn right we have," Richard boomed. "He's the best in the world." Liam leaned forward slightly. "You've been speaking to him through an intermediary, a law firm in Zurich. You've never seen his face. You only know his reputation and his work." "That's all we need to know," Eleanor said primly. "I think it's time you knew more," Liam said. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a slim, leather portfolio. He opened it on the table. It didn't contain blueprints or contracts. It contained a single, heavy sheet of drafting paper. On it was a pencil sketch, a new, even more elegant design for the tower's spire, incorporating the change he had made in his office the day of Sarah's phone call. Underneath it was a signature, written in bold, architectural script. "Aethelred." He slid the drawing across the table to Richard. Richard stared at it, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What is this? Some kind of fan art?" "Look at the signature, Richard," Liam said quietly. Then he took a pen from his pocket, and on a clean napkin beside his plate, he wrote the same name again, with the exact same distinctive flourish. "Aethelred." Richard's eyes darted from the napkin to the drawing, then to Liam's face. A wave of cognitive dissonance washed over him. The idea was too monstrous, too impossible to comprehend. He started to laugh, a harsh, barking sound. You're Aethelred? That's the most absurd thing I've ever heard. You design patios. You're a nobody." Liam didn't respond to the outburst. He simply reached back into his portfolio and took out a second document. This one was not a drawing. It was the Articles of Incorporation for the firm Aethelred, LLC. He placed it on the table. Then a third document, the Master Design Contract between Aethelred, LLC, and Preston Corp., the one that gave the architect unprecedented control over the project's execution. And finally, a fourth, his own passport. He opened it to the photo page. Name, Aethelred Liam Sterling. He laid them all out in a neat row. The evidence, the facts. "Aethelred is a family name," Liam explained, his voice as calm as a lecturer in a quiet hall. "My great-grandfather's name. I use it for my large-scale projects to separate them from my local consultation work, to maintain my privacy, a privacy that, until now, has served me well." The room was utterly silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Richard stared at the documents, his face turning a dark, mottled shade of red. Eleanor's hand was at her throat, her mouth open in a silent "oh" of horror. But it was Clara's reaction that was the most profound. She was staring at Liam, but not at the man she thought she knew. She was seeing someone else entirely. The quiet, unambitious husband, the useful furniture, had dissolved. In his place was a stranger, a man of immense hidden power and staggering patience. The man her family revered as a god was the same man she had dismissed as an afterthought. The scale of her misjudgment, of her blindness, was so colossal it defied words. "No," she whispered, "it's not possible." "It's not only possible, Clara, it's the truth," Liam said, his gaze finally locking with hers. The coldness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, bottomless sorrow. "The entire time you were looking down on me, you were standing in the shadow of my work. The legacy you were so desperate to secure was being built by the man you felt nothing for." He let that sink in, the final, devastating irony. But he was not finished. The architectural revelation was merely the foundation. Now he was ready to build the rest of the structure. "But being the architect," Liam continued, his voice dropping to an almost conversational tone, "is only half of the story." The blood drained from Richard's face. He looked from the documents to Liam, a new, dawning terror in his eyes. He had built his career on leverage and control, and he was just beginning to understand how completely he had lost both. "The Preston Tower isn't just a building," Liam went on, folding his hands on the table. "It's the anchor of a full district redevelopment. A project of that scale requires more than just a blueprint. It requires land, a lot of it." He looked at Richard. "You secured the primary lot, it's true, but you were so eager to announce the project, so focused on the glory, that you overlooked the details, the surrounding properties, the access rights, the utility easements. You assumed you could acquire them later or force the city to grant them. That was your mistake." He slid another file from his portfolio. This one was thicker. "For the past 3 years, my holding company, A.L. Sterling Holdings, has been acquiring every single property on the 3 blocks surrounding your lot. The old print shop on the corner, the multi-level parking garage, the small apartment building to the west, even the land under the main municipal power substation." He opened the file. It was filled with deeds, titles, and contracts, all bearing the name of his company. "You are on an island, Richard, an island I own. You cannot bring a single bulldozer onto that site without my permission. You cannot lay a single pipe or connect a single cable without my signature. You thought Aethelred was your brilliant, anonymous servant. You were wrong. Aethelred is your landlord, your banker, and your master." Richard made a choking sound, half rage, half despair. This is fraud. It's illegal." "Is it?" Liam's tone was steel. "I suggest you have your lawyers look closely at the contracts you signed. I have. They are ironclad. You were so dazzled by the Aethelred name, you didn't do your due diligence. You granted the architectural firm, my firm, unprecedented oversight and control, including final approval on all logistical and engineering partnerships. My holding company is simply the primary partner my architectural firm has chosen. It's all perfectly legal. It's just business." He used their own language against them, the cold, impersonal logic they applied to everything. Eleanor began to weep, quiet, gulping sobs of a woman watching her entire world of status and security evaporate. Clara was frozen, her mind reeling. She wasn't just married to a secret genius. She was married to the man who held her family's entire fate in his hands. The man she had planned to leave once he was no longer useful. The irony was so potent, it was nauseating. "Liam," she finally breathed, his name a question, a plea. "Why?" Liam's gaze softened for a fraction of a second as he looked at her. "At first, It was just good business strategy, a way to control the project and ensure it was built to my exact specifications without interference. It was a way to protect my vision. He paused and his eyes hardened again as he looked at Richard and Eleanor. But in the last few months, my motivations changed. After a decade of being dismissed, of being ridiculed, of being treated as less than nothing, I realized this project wasn't just about architecture, it was about value. You see, Richard, you were right. Every person has a value. You just have to know how to measure it. And you measured me all wrong. He stood up from the table. The Preston Tower, as you envisioned it, will not be built. Your family's name will not be on it. Your legacy is a mirage. You have no land, no access, and as of this moment, no architect. He looked at Clara, his voice devoid of malice, filled only with a profound, final sadness. You told your therapist you felt nothing for me. I wonder what you're feeling now. Is it respect? Is it fear? Or is it just the shock of discovering that the furniture you were about to throw away was actually the entire house? He left them there, sitting in the ruins of their arrogance, the untouched food growing cold on their plates. He walked into his office and closed the door, the click of the latch sounding like the closing of a vault. The reckoning was complete. The aftermath was about to begin. The silence from the dining room was a living entity. For several long minutes there was no sound at all. Then, a chair scraped violently against the floor. The door to Liam's office was thrown open. Richard Preston stood there, his face contorted in a mask of purple rage, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume on a man who had shrunk. "You will not get away with this," he snarled, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I will ruin you. I will sue you into oblivion. I will tell the world what you are, a snake, a charlatan." Liam turned slowly from his desk, his expression unreadable. "You're welcome to try, Richard, but my lawyers are considerably better than yours. And what will you tell the world? That you were so blinded by your own ego, you signed away your legacy to your son-in-law without realizing it? That the man you publicly ridiculed as a failure was secretly the master of your universe? I don't think that's a story you want in the papers. The humiliation would be absolute." The word humiliation struck Richard like a physical blow. It was his own weapon, now turned against him with devastating precision. He deflated, the rage momentarily replaced by a wave of pure, impotent despair. He seemed to age a decade in 10 seconds. He was pushed aside by Clara. She stumbled into the office, her eyes wide and pleading. "Liam, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "We can fix this. We can talk. I didn't know. I swear I had no idea." "That, Clara, is the entire point," Liam said, his voice gentle but unyielding. "You didn't know because you never looked. You never asked. You were so certain of my smallness that you never once considered the possibility that you were wrong. You didn't want a partner. You wanted an accessory, something that wouldn't challenge you or your family." "I was wrong," she cried, tears streaming down her face now. "I was a fool, a complete and utter fool. I was raised to believe in all the wrong things. Status, money, appearances. I see that now. Please, Liam, don't do this to my family. Don't do this to us." The word us hung in the air, a ghost of a concept that no longer had any meaning. "There is no us, Clara," Liam said softly. "You dissolved it. You dissolved it in every condescending conversation. In every moment you chose their approval over my dignity. You put the final nail in its coffin when you told a stranger you felt nothing for me. These are the consequences of your choices. Of all your choices." Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her face a mess of tear-streaked makeup. "Think of the family," she pleaded weakly. "The name." "Your name is built on a lie," Liam said, cutting her off, his patience finally wearing thin. "It's built on the idea that you are better than other people because of your money. But your money is gone, your legacy is gone, and all that's left is the truth of who you are: arrogant, cruel, and blind. Now I have work to do. I suggest you leave my house." The finality in his tone was absolute. There was no room for negotiation. Richard, looking utterly broken, turned and walked out. Eleanor followed, sobbing hysterically. Clara remained, a statue of regret. "What happens now?" she whispered. "Now you get to build a life," Liam said. "A real one, not one propped up by your father's money or my secrets. You get to find out who Clara Preston is when the name means nothing." He walked to his desk and wrote a number on a piece of paper. It was the contact for a financial advisor he trusted. "This man will help you set up a trust. It will be more than enough for you to live comfortably, but it will not be enough to live extravagantly. The rest of my assets are being tied up in the new development." He handed her the paper. Her hand trembled as she took it. "So that's it? A payoff?" "It's a fresh start," he corrected. "What you do with it is up to you. You can try to cling to the life you had, or you can become someone worthy of respect. Not because of who your father is, or who your husband was, but because of who you choose to be." She stared at him, the full weight of his judgment and his mercy crashing down on her. He wasn't punishing her. He was setting her free, a freedom that felt more terrifying than any punishment. She turned and walked out of the office, out of the house, and out of his life, the piece of paper clutched in her hand like a verdict. Liam stood alone in his silent house. The smell of the uneaten dinner still lingered in the air. He walked back into the dining room and began to clear the table, scraping the gourmet food into the trash. It was a methodical, cleansing act. He was clearing away the last remnants of his old life, making space for the future he was now free to build. The quiet before the storm was over. The storm had hit, and now came the long, quiet process of rebuilding in its wake. The days that followed were a quiet cataclysm for the Preston family. Liam's predictions were ruthlessly accurate. Richard, in a desperate, face-saving move, tried to initiate a lawsuit. His lawyers took one look at the contracts he had signed and advised him, in no uncertain terms, that he didn't have a case. In fact, they warned him that any legal action would trigger countersuits from A.L. Sterling Holdings for breach of contract that would bankrupt him personally. He was trapped. The news broke not in a scandalous headline, but in the dry, factual pages of the city's financial journal. Preston Tower project transferred to A.L. Sterling Holdings amidst major restructuring. The article was clinical, speaking of logistical consolidations and strategic partnerships. But the world they lived in knew how to read between the lines. Richard Preston had lost control. The legacy project was no longer his. The social fallout was immediate and brutal. Phones stopped ringing. Invitations ceased to arrive. Business partners who had been fawning over Richard at the gala now crossed the street to avoid him. Their world, built on the fragile scaffolding of perception and reputation, collapsed overnight. Richard became a recluse, a bitter, broken man trapped in a mansion that now felt like a mausoleum. Eleanor's social life vanished. The friends she had cultivated for decades melted away. Her status as a society queen revoked as quickly as it had been granted. They were ghosts in their own lives, haunted by the specter of their public humiliation. Liam, meanwhile, moved with quiet efficiency. He formally dissolved his small, local architectural firm, the hobby business that had been his cover for so long. He moved his operations into a sleek, minimalist office in a downtown high-rise, the headquarters of Athelred. The name on the door was no longer a pseudonym, but a brand synonymous with vision, power, and unassailable integrity. He initiated the official rebranding of the project. The Preston Tower was dead. In its place, the Sterling Tower would rise, named not for himself, but for his grandfather, a carpenter who had taught him the value of building things that last, whether they were made of wood or character. One afternoon, about a month after the dinner, his assistant buzzed him. "A Ms. Preston to see you, Mr. Sterling. She doesn't have an appointment." Liam paused. Send her in. Clara walked into his office. She was a different woman from the one who had left his house. The expensive designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple dress. Her hair was pulled back, and she wore little makeup. She looked younger and terribly fragile. She looked at the sprawling view from his office window, at the city laid out like a map. This is impressive, she said, her voice soft. This is who you were all along. This is a part of who I am, he corrected. One part you never saw. She turned to face him, her hands clasped in front of her as if to keep them from shaking. I didn't come here to ask for anything, Liam. I know I have no right. I came to apologize. Properly. He gestured to a chair, but she shook her head, choosing to stand. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she said, about everything, about what you said. You were right. I was a coward. I was so afraid of not meeting my family's expectations that I never stopped to form my own. I looked at you and I didn't see a person. I saw a reflection of my own insecurities. You were quiet, so I thought you were weak. You were humble, so I thought you had nothing to be proud of. I was wrong about everything. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. The worst part, she continued, her voice thick with emotion, is that I think some part of me knew. There were moments, like at the dinner party when you answered my father's question. I felt this flash of pride, and it scared me, because it meant my world was wrong. It was easier to be angry at you for making me uncomfortable than to question everything I'd been taught. It was easier to be blind. Liam listened, his expression unreadable. He had expected pleas, perhaps even anger. This raw, painful self-awareness was unexpected. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she said. I don't deserve that. And I'm not asking for us to get back together. I know I destroyed that. I needed you to know that I see it now. I see you. And I am so, so sorry for everything. She turned to leave, her apology delivered, her purpose fulfilled. Clara, he said, stopping her at the door. She turned back. The financial advisor you spoke with, he said. He works for me. He informed me that you declined the trust I offered. Why? A faint, sad smile touched her lips. You told me to build a real life, to find out who I am. I can't do that with your money. It would just be another crutch. I'm taking a course in landscape design. I was always good with gardens. For the first time since Sarah's phone call, Liam felt a flicker of something other than sorrow or resolution. It was a faint glimmer of respect. She had understood the true lesson. The money was never the point. Good luck, Clara, he said, and he meant it. You too, Liam, she replied. She walked out of his office, and this time, the closing of the door felt different. It wasn't the end of a war. It was the quiet, dignified end of a chapter. He was left not with the satisfaction of victory, but with the complex, bittersweet reality of necessary change. He had not just demolished a family's false legacy, he had, perhaps, laid the foundation for one person to build a true one. Months melted into a year. The Sterling Tower began to rise from the ground, a skeleton of steel reaching for the sky. It was a testament to Liam's vision, a landmark taking shape. His work consumed him, but it was a joyful, creative consumption. He was no longer hiding, he was building. One day, a man he recognized from the gala, Marcus Thorne, the one who had pitied him for Clara's choice, came to his office. Thorne was now desperate to get his own company involved in the Sterling Tower project, and he groveled with an oily sycophancy that Liam found distasteful. Mr. Sterling, Aethelred, sir, Thorne began, his face stretched in a painful smile. I must confess I feel like a fool. That night at the Preston Gala, I had no idea who I was speaking to. A true visionary, hiding in plain sight. Liam looked at him, his gaze cool. You knew who you were speaking to, Mr. Thorne. You were speaking to Liam Sterling, a man you considered beneath you. The only thing that has changed is your perception of my net worth. Thorne's smile faltered. My grandfather was a carpenter, Liam said, his voice quiet but carrying immense weight. He taught me that a person's worth is in the quality of their work and the strength of their character, not the size of their bank account. You and the Prestons believe the opposite. That is why your world is so fragile, and that is why you will not be a part of this project. My grandfather would not have approved of working with a man who judges others so poorly. He dismissed Thorne with a polite nod, leaving the man speechless and ashamed. The incident reaffirmed his choices. He hadn't just sought revenge, he had enforced a moral standard. He was building his tower not just with steel and glass, but with the principles he held dear. He kept tabs on Clara, not out of lingering attachment, but out of a sense of responsibility. He learned through a mutual acquaintance that she had completed her course and had taken a job with the city's parks department. She was, by all accounts, quiet, hardworking, and content. She was rebuilding her life from the ground up, literally planting new roots. He felt a sense of peace in knowing she had found her way. His cousin Sarah called him one evening. I saw the tower today, Liam, she said, her voice warm. It's beautiful. Are you happy? Liam looked out his window at the rising structure, a beacon against the setting sun. I'm at peace, Sarah, he replied. I've learned that happiness can be fleeting, but peace is foundational. I've secured my foundations. He had realized that true power wasn't the ability to destroy, it was the ability to build. He had demolished the Prestons' world of lies not with dynamite, but by building a structure of truth so immense and undeniable that their fragile reality simply could not coexist with it. His victory wasn't in their fall, but in his own quiet, dignified ascent. He had not stooped to their level. He had forced them to look up to his. The story of Liam and the Prestons became a quiet legend in the city's inner circles, a cautionary tale about arrogance and the danger of underestimating the quiet man in the room. Liam Sterling, once the invisible man, was now respected not just for his wealth and talent, but for his character. He had proven that true worth is not something you inherit or display. It is something you build, slowly, patiently, and with integrity, until it is so strong that it becomes its own monument. What Liam did was more than just evening a score. It was a profound act of moral rebalancing. He didn't seek to impoverish the Prestons, but to strip them of the unearned arrogance that wealth had provided. He left them with enough to live, but not enough to rule. He gave them the one thing their money could never buy, a confrontation with their true selves. For Richard and Eleanor, it was a hell of their own making. For Clara, it became an unexpected and painful salvation. This story is a reminder that the most powerful people are often not the loudest. They are the ones who observe, who understand, and who build. They know that respect cannot be demanded, it can only be earned. And they know that a person's true character is revealed not by how they treat their superiors, but by how they treat those they believe to be beneath them. What do you think? Was Liam's response an act of perfect justice, or was it a cold, calculated revenge? Could he, or should he, have forgiven Clara? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is part of the story. And if you've ever felt like the quiet one in the room, remember the strength that lies in patience and integrity. Thank you for joining us, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that explore the depths of human nature.